seconds. And we are live. Okay. Uzgumachi is going to introduce our guest.
Francesco Leoni graduated from the Polytechnic of Milan after being awarded with an Erasmus Socrates scholarship at Brunel University in London. After graduating, he opened his own studio, collaborating with professional offices, in particular for 2 years with David Chipperfield Architects in London. He alternates professional and academic activity through a PhD in architectural design at the University Polytechnica of Marseille region, and as adjunct professor since 2007. Visiting professor at the Technische Hochschule Mittelhessen. He currently teaches at the Interior and Architectural and Urban Composition Studio Lab at the Politecnico of Turin and Politecnico of Milan. An expert in museography and planning in archaeological areas, he is a professor at the Accademia Adrianea di Architettura e Archeologia Onus, for which he is deputy director of the itinerant master in museography, architecture and archaeology, strategic planning and innovative management of archaeological areas, author of numerous publications and monographs. His research investigates the nature of architectural space and the relationship between project and context. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much for inviting me. I want to thank you mainly Professor Kamitz for this very welcome invitation. And I also want to say hello to my close and old friend, Luca Orlandi, old since we know since a long time, and always because of those designing meeting and workshop we organize all over. Part of them were strongly attended from Professor Kamitz as well in the past. So this research community seems to be profitable somehow. So thank you so much again for being there. I actually a great lover of Istanbul, and I would have loved to come back to to Turkey again, because I'm not coming since a long time, and honestly I miss Istanbul mainly, and I hope next time I can come and visit you straightly there. But don't put any words in the middle, and let me share my presentation so we can start. Can you see it? Is it visible to you?
It is. You only need to go full screen. There you go. Perfect.
Well, my lecture is titled Musealising History, because having had a little chat with the Professor Kamitz, he told me that the focus of your project is about insisting on the stratified city with a new project you have to develop in the city of Istanbul. So I'm going to tell you briefly that the structure of my lecture is going to be divided into a first introduction part, one analysis of a built-it project from the Nieto and Sobejano office from Madrid, and then I will present you two final theses for graduation thesis for Polytechnic of Milan that I followed with some student of mine that are settled, or I mean that are located in Turkey. One is in Istanbul and one is in Limera in Licia. So let me start, and let me begin with this lecture. And so, why architecture for archaeology? This is a long story, actually, and because we started, when I speak about we, I talk about me and my group of work, team of research, which I'm part of. We started to work on this subject a long time ago. It was the end of the last millennium, actually. Because we really believed that the necessity for the students to understand the foundations of the discipline were very important. I mean, we noticed that our students, even in the last years of university, didn't know the foundation of the discipline. So they started designing incredible contemporary architecture without knowing almost nothing about what was behind. So the famous sentence about standing on the shoulder of the giants were dismissed, since actually they design architecture without having knowledge of what stands before. So the subject I'm going to present you in the following lecture could be very important for your future, mainly in Turkey, that, as I told you, is a country I really love more. The first time I came to Turkey was 1985, and since then I came at least 20 times over there. So this subject could be very important for you and for your future. And this is a privileged branch that will always be more and more strategic in the cultural policies of the countries that hold a great archaeological and cultural heritage, like Turkey is. This subject is called Architecture for Archaeology, and in its unfolding, this set of knowledge correlates three disciplines: architecture, archaeology, and museography. Museography actually is the hinge that connects architecture and archaeology, is the common ground on which those two disciplines can talk to each other. These subjects take body and shape between the second and the third decades of the 19th century, almost simultaneously in Rome and Athens, and later throughout the second half of the century, still in Rome, but moving to France. First of all, one of the main studied example was the consolidation of the Colosseum and the reconstruction of the Arch of Titus in Rome, and with the restoration program of the Acropolis in Athens, downstream the independence of the Greece, after the plan of Leo von Klenze in the beginning of the 19th century. Afterwards, with systematic studies, excavation, and experimentation of French pensionnaires of Villa Medici in Rome, the one taking part in the Prix de Rome, that was an Academy Award that gave the winners the chance of spending 3 years walking on the classic soil to learn the foundation of the discipline, and then to come back to their own country and become institutional architects. Visible, not visible. What do I mean by that? The idea is that when we work in an archaeological context, the main theme is the recognition and measurement of the distance that exists between what is seen and what is not seen. That is, between the visible ruin and its original absent state. What do I mean by that? Our goal, our idea is to understand archaeology not as a document, but as what is left of something that in the beginning was architecture. We are architects and we deal with architecture. We are not archaeologists. So the main goal to us is to understand the designing needs of a particular place, a particular site, and archaeology is just what is left after a design process. What we want to work with is the need, the ideas, and whatever it was needed to design the former architecture. Actually, this distance, through this distance that is between the original state and the actual ruinal state, have seen a lot of transformation through the history. So it is a sort of a palimpsest where you can have lots of stratification and visible thresholds that constitute the trace of events that affect the place. So the fact that you can see something that is not a continuous, normal, linear path in the a secting of the place, but is an idea that took in consideration all the stratification, all the layers that overimposed through the years on the same site. That is a palimpsest. And this is what it's very important to us, because you want mainly ever have just the formal and original appreciation of the place, but basically you will always have an artifact, a manufact that is composed by different layers in different times. Look at this building that is in Rome. This is the temple of Antonino Faustina, and the temple is from the Roman Empire period, the 3rd century after Christ. But inside of it, through the 18th century, a church was built in the former situation, the former place of the naos, of the cell inside the temple. Here you can see a little bit better. Basically, this is an engraving, but if you go to Rome, you can see it pretty clearly and pretty understandable. You can see even the temple through some historical photographs. Those are photographs from the beginning of the 20th century. And you can see how Rome used to appear and how the temple used to be inserted in the city tissue. And you can see how many excavation was required to recover the original foundation and the original layer and position of the original temple. Here you can see some picture, and as you can clearly understand, those photographs has been taken, I guess, something like 10 years ago, a decade ago, and you can see that all those steps are not enough to fill the gap between the original layer, the original position, height of the temple, and the part of the temple that was buried under the ground of the historical stratification. So we have a Roman temple, 18th century church inside of the temple, and even all those layers that were in the middle. And what is the original part of this building? Is the Roman temple, or is the 18th century church, or is the complete stratification of all the layers of history? Here another picture of the idea, and you can see people walking through the holy path in the Roman Forum, the visitable area in the center of Rome. But we can say that about lots of monuments, mainly in Rome, obviously. Here you can see what was the Marcellus Theater from the 1st century after Christ, where during the 16th century, Baldassare Peruzzi designed a palace over it, using the former theater as a foundation for the new palace that is still there and is still inhabited. Or again, here we can see a project from Leon Battista Alberti. This is a project in Rimini. Maybe you've heard of the place. Here you can see a former Gothic church turned into a kind of a pagan temple celebrating the Malatesta family and his heritage. Here you can see how the new building encapsulates the former Gothic church, always keeping the relationship between the new and the old. And you can even see in this bottom right picture the relationship between the new arches from the 15th century and the former Gothic church behind it. Something that we can even recover in Carlos Scarpa works mainly. Or here you can see the Mezquita in Cordoba, where the church entered into the former Casbah and I don't remember now the name of the building, that is the celebration for the Muslim period in Spain. Here you can see a little bit better. Okay, So basically, the intervention on the ruins and the monuments of antiquity aimed at the recovery and the rehabilitation as a physiological thing in the history of city and architecture. This idea always exists and also determined, in particular circumstances, important transformation of existing buildings. We can say, in essence, that the history of the transformation of the buildings coincides with the history of architecture somehow. There are four main goals that we have to keep in consideration when we start working on archaeological areas. The first one is the relationship between continuity and discontinuity, and so the emphasizing of the diversity, because the idea of this continuity and discontinuity between new and the old, and so as a corollary, the need to introduce the concept of diversity in terms of shape and materials, between the new intervention and the ruins, interrupting the unity of style of the classical completeness of the final result. This attitude open up some debates, always open about some idea of this necessity of making the different period layers to be different from the former one, from the previous one. Because there are lots of people that, on the contrary, believes that the architecture should have a continuity that shouldn't be interrupting without creating architecture that are a kind of a Frankenstein building at the end. The second point is the intervention on the cultural heritage as a musealization. In fact, this idea of using museography is something that turn the original function, the original idea of the former building into a museum displays. So changing completely is nature. We, and when I say we again, I speak about all my group of work, don't strongly believe in function as a guiding rule for designing architecture. So the changing of a function of a building in its function doesn't make a big difference, because to us what is important is architecture itself, and museography, so turning a theater or a forum or whatever it is into a museum, to us is one of the clearer and easier idea of musealizing a place, that also means to preserve it and to make this place alive again. And not also from the social and cultural point of view, but even from the profitable point of view. The third goal, instead, is about reversibility. Again, another debating point that we always deal with, that is the concept of reversibility, understood as ideological request aimed to protect the original artifact, and later, in the sense intended instead as a regressive and real terror of the error. The point is, when you work in such a place, you obviously have to deal with some problems, and one of the main requests is to make your new intervention reversible. So that means that in case I want to change it in 10 years, I can bring the site at the situation I found it 10 years before, without leaving any traces of my intervention. Mainly, this idea is connected to the fact that through the century we developed this idea of terror of the error, because through some project we overimpose to very crucial site, crucial under the heritage point of view, we made disasters. So to avoid the possibility and even the chance of creating new mistakes in such a places, we are asked all the time to design a reversible architecture or intervention, whatever it's going to be. The last one, finally, is the critical relationship between old and new, as a key element in the interpretation that the Western societies are given in terms of policy for an historical identity. Since the end of the 18th century and gradually more and more intensively until today, this relationship by an eminently cultural level shifts on a level of cultural politics. So we have two different layers about that. That is, from one point of view, the obvious constitution of an historical identity or implementation of an historical identity of any community that is needed and is strongly inside the human being. But from the other point of view, this kind of identification as also reflection from the touristic and so from the economic point of view. That's why it often become a cultural politics of implementation of this kind of situation. But now, after this brief, how can I say, this brief introduction from the theoretical point of view, I'm going to show you 3 projects. As I told you, one is a built one, and the last 2 are just a final grade project. This is a project from Nieto and Sobejano in Spain, mainly in Cordoba from 2009. And is a project insisting on the Medinat al-Zahara, a great project, honestly, that's something I strongly believe in, that has something to do with the atmosphere an intervention should or could recreate when it gets to designing in archaeological areas. Here you can see the archaeological areas the way it was when they visited for the first time to understand what they could have done. They were asked to design a visitor center and a museum about this archaeological area, and that's why they visited, I mean, the Nieto and Sobejano office, an office from Madrid. I guess you know it. So visiting the area, they needed to be permeated by the place, by the visual images they got, but also from the overall atmosphere of the places. Here you can see a closer image. And they started to understand which kind of project they could have developed. They didn't have that many indication. That was a competition that they afterly won. Here you can see how the place has been restored through the ages. And here you can see where the archaeological site is, the green one, related to the main center of the city, that is a faraway place. So they started analyzing the archaeological site, also the idea of what is on Cordoba. That's why I showed you before the Mezquita of Cordoba. And they decided that the project should keep in itself the overall atmosphere, the overall views, the overall architectural indication that they could have get in the archaeological site. So here you can see the overall plan, keeping also all those parts that weren't excavated at the moment. Mainly is all the right part of this map. So you can see this big rectangle. They define it, so designing the boundary of the site just to recognize a sort of temenos, a sort of fence that keeps the site inside. They divided in two, and they decided to design their own project somewhere else, as you can see here, keeping somehow the same proportion of the original site. So the main goal was, we don't want to create a new museum insisting straight on the ruins, but we decided to design the new museum somewhere else, recreating the atmosphere of the original site. Here you can see on the upper picture the archaeological site, on the lower one the site where the project would have insisted afterwards. So the environment is pretty different. So the archaeological site is just on beside a little hill, a little mountain, while the new museum would have insisted on a valley. Here you can see the model of the project, and here you can see the developing of the area. And here it's clear the position of the new museum compared to the position of the original rectangle that I showed you before. Here it is. So, as you will, I hope you'll notice through those pictures, they started in redesigning the new museum, keeping in consideration what they saw in their archaeological site. So even if you move apart, they decided to re-evoke some of the views they had. First of all, they decided to bury the museum a bit lower in the ground, so depressing the museum a couple of meters lower, just to give the input of entering an archaeological site, because you know, when you go to an archaeological site, it's all about digging. So they decided not to create a volume completely outside the ground, but to have something that is inside, recreating a kind of horizontal environment. And here you can see how the final project looks like. Sorry. Again, here a very horizontal building, a very horizontal project that affect the territory in a very gentle somehow and humble way. And here you can see the approaching to the entrance and the first ramp that brings you down in the lower level, the one I told you before about the idea of digging, of entering the ground. Here you can see some people exiting the museum. And inside, they start in the recreating spaces. That's basically, it's what I believe our job should have to do with. That is designing spaces, managing spaces, designing atmospheres of the places. This is the main entrance of the museum. After you made your ramp, after you follow the ramp, and this is the interior part of the museum. The museum, being a little bit depressed by the normal layer of the valley, is completely inward look like. I mean, everything is referred to its inside. There's not real connection with the surrounding, both for the design project idea and secondly for museographic needs. Probably you already know that any museum needs less windows as possible. Mainly, the light should come from the top, should be a zenithal one, because too much presence of windows, of lights, of glasses all over interfere with the appreciation of the collection exposed and exhibited into the museum. So you can see this is the main central court that distributes all the environments, from which you can clearly understood that you are somehow underground, even if you have an open up sky, but you don't never connect yourself and your site with the ground level outside. Those are all some of the images from the offices that they kindly gave me for this lecture, because I had the fortune to get to know Fuensantanietto and Enrique Sobejano, great person, more than great architects. And here you can see the ramp and the steps that fill the gap between the outside level and the inside level, the one I told you already about. Those are, again, some views of the interiors, but Let me come to what is more impressive of this project, that from one point of view is a great piece of contemporary architecture, but it also has some peculiar needs. This is the only little tower from which you can have the view of the surrounding, just to reconnect the visitors to the rest of the environment, just not to make yourself feeling lost somehow, somewhere in a sort of a kind of a desert in the center of Spain. And this is the displaying project for the collection they decided to exhibit inside the museum itself, recreating in a very simple and somehow elegant way some situation and some environments that are clearly contemporary, but keeping a kind of a classic idea of exhibition and exposition. Even the fruition of the museum, even the flows inside the building are pretty clear and classic somehow. But here you can see in which way they decided to recreate the environments between the original archaeology on the left and the new museum on the right. Here you can see, for example, how the creation of dead-end street and dead-end perspective can be compared in the new museum to the original archaeology. Or here you can see as some geometrical shape diffused all around, and in this case on the left, frozen by the restoration project, keeping these triple arches kept inside a square, like an isolated element, can be re-evoked with this white square suspending on the new architecture. Or, for example, the rhythm of these sequences of elements of these, I would say, pillars somehow, is re-evoked in the new museum through this sort of theory of sets that keeps the ceiling standing. Again, a road that perpendicularly find a wall that stops the view and that address you somewhere else. So here you can clearly, I bet, understand how the main goal of the designers, of the architects, were to re-evoke atmosphere, re-evoke spatial situation through new architecture, evoking some situation you already experienced visiting the archaeological areas. Again, that former wall keeping the triple arch is re-evoked by the square suspended and detached by the behind wall. And even in the decoration, they decided to reuse the lower part of the walls that in the archaeological site are depicted in a dark red painting, is instead re-evoked with this orangish idea that is something that even reminds the visitor a rusty metal shed that keeps in itself the idea of the time passing and the fact that something has been ruined. Here, to me, it's pretty clear the analogy between those two images. That's a view of the rooftop that is not actually walkable, but just to show you better how this project look like from the top. Because actually, as you saw, since you have a mountain pretty close, you can see the museum from the top. And as you can clearly appreciate, this rooftop keeps the color of the surrounding grounds, trying to I don't want to say camouflage itself in the surrounding, but somehow keeping a continuity without interrupting this landscape view with a too aggressive or too overimposing architecture that could have been probably too strong for the area. So you have a depressed building that overtake the ground level just for a meter, and even the color reminds the division and the situation of the surrounding places. And those squares are repeated even in the design of the outside area of the cultivated one, and even the part of the parking lots. Here you can see from the top the building and how not effective it is. Try to guess this building with a white or a black roof, how different this would have appeared. While in this case, it looks like that the roof is covered by the same ground, the same earth that you can find all around, just a little bit darker to signify heat. That was the project that you can easily check out on the web. There are other projects from the same office that can be analyzed to bring you some ideas about what we just said. Obviously, here we don't have the time, and probably is not even the place to talk about it. Now I'm going to show you the two final project for graduation in the Polytechnic of Milan of my former students. The first one is this project insisting in Istanbul itself. This is a project on the Bukoleon Palace. Sorry for the pronunciation. My Turkish is not that good. And we decided to call it a Museum of Duality. This museum insists strongly in the city. So it has to do with the forma urbis, with the shape of the city and all the layers that a city like Istanbul keeps in itself, that are incredible and they are impressive. Here there's you can have an indication of the situation of Istanbul, but obviously you know this better than me. This was just for the commission that probably didn't know about Istanbul that much, and you can see the situation of Istanbul in the 920s, and this is an hypothetical reconstruction of the historical peninsula in the 13th century. Here you can see some images still again about the city of Istanbul, and again you definitely know better than me the situation, but you can see here the project site, the Bukoleon's Palace. Those are the developing of the city of Istanbul and Constantinople through the centuries. So from the Roman and to the Ottoman period and so on until the second half of the last century. And this is the division of the area and the way they could affect our project. You can see the main situation of the archaeological park of Sultanahmet, obviously, the area of Suleymaniye, the area of Zeyrek, and the land walls of Theodosius. Everything that could be referred to a closer, to some ruins, some archaeologies that could be referred to the period of our building. Here, again, something to show the boards of professors that should have judged this project, showing some of the main situation of the city to make understand the people where our project is insisting. And this is basically the area of our project and how this project could have appeared in the 13th century. This is obviously a reconstruction. And this is how the palace used to appear in the beginning of the 20th century. So you can see that the sea, the Marmara Sea, was basically touching the building itself. While actually at the moment, as you clearly know, the construction of Kennedy Street create all a space, a built-in space in front of the area that is not close to the sea and to the water anymore. At the moment, mainly the situation of the archaeological site is this one you can see here. So very inside the city, and even with lots of building insisting on the archaeology itself. Here you can see some picture, and you can see the plan and the elevation of the site, and you can already see the position of the Kennedy Cadesi and even of the railroad tracks that were insisting and still insisting in the area, despite they are abandoned, that cut the archaeological area in a very strong and brutal way. Here you can see the railroad, and basically the railroad tracks became the limit that divided the archaeological area from the normal residential new area, cutting these situations in two mainly. Other views of the former vaults of the Bucalon Palace. And here you can see a bit better the situation. Obviously, the ruins of Bucalon are the one in dark brown. This is the Kennedy Cadesi. And this is all the part of land that has been built through last century. And that makes that distance between the palace and the sea, that, as I showed you before, formerly used to arrive completely close to the Bucalon Palace. Here you can see the restitution of the original plan of the Bucalon Palace compared to the plan of other Roman historical and Roman archaeology found in the area itself. And here you can see an overimposing part of the archaeological remains and the new city that settled over the remains themselves. Here is even clearer how the railroad tracks cuts the Bucalon Palace site in a very strong and brutal way, but also you can even appreciate how the former Roman buildings became the foundation for new neighborhood, new quartier, and the new buildings that started to insist directly on the ruins. Here you can see an analysis that has been done between the buildings that are in bad condition in our area and buildings that are in the preservation list, just to understand what could be removed, what could be changed, what could be destroyed with our project, and what instead could be kept being an asset and a cultural asset. All the axes of the former situation and even the axis of the railroad and the actual positioning of the building compared to the city shape. Basically, those are the first main ideas related to the project we are supposed to design. And our first part, our starting point was exactly the rehabilitation of the railroad tracks. I mean, we have these abandoned railroad tracks, unused, that from one point of view now are just a wound in the middle of the city that is not usable at the moment, and it's even a decaying element for the surrounding, so interfere, and also it increase the level and the perception of abandoning of the place, that probably we could rehabilitate using the railroad themselves as a layer that could be renovated, that could be used again. Probably you all know the project for the new line in New York. So we decided to rehabilitate all the railroad to create a a path that could be used by bicycles, but also can be used for walking or for jogging, that could have embraced the entire historical peninsula, not for production needs any longer, but for a touristic and even for the people living in Istanbul themselves, using this strong line of connection as a amazing, I would say, line that could help the people into appreciate the surrounding. But get back to the title of the project, the Museum of Duality. Why duality? Because Istanbul is a city shared into Europe and Asia, is a city shared into, divided into history and modernity, is a city where monuments and dwellings lives together, and even a place where ruins are affected by industrial infrastructure like our railroads. So a continuing sequences of dualities that are pretty recognizable all over. We decided to choose which material we would have used for our project to keep the essence and the quality of materials and colors you could have find in Istanbul, so stone, bricks, and wood. And also we started from the original vision of Bukoleon Palace, even keeping in consideration some of the churches and some of the monuments you could have find closer. You definitely know this building better than me. We used that example as references, and then we started with our designing process that basically, as I told you in the beginning, insist on the idea of using the archaeology as the starting point of new project and new intervention. Those were the reconstruction building drawings of the Bukoleon Palace that were the main idea from which our new project would have started from. So the rhythm designed by the arches, the rhythm designed by the plan would have been the rhythm that should have constitutes the new project. Here you can see the situation of the ruin nowadays. And as I told you, the first intervention was the one of reusing the railroad tracks, keeping some holes to let the people to appreciate the original railroads as a testimony, as a witness of the time passing. Here you can see the original Bukoleon plan overimposed, and this is basically the new project. A new project that somehow is intended to rebuild the volumetric appearance of the original palace, and to emphasize the railroad line. Obviously, our project has nothing to do with a philological reconstruction. It's not a restoration. It's not a philological reconstruction. It's just a new building, a new museum that aims to rehabilitate the volumetric presence of the former archaeology into a new building. Here you can see the plan of the project on the lower path, the different the different layer of the project. I'm not going to spend too much time on it, also because I'm noticing that we are running out of time. And here you can see the planning volumetric view with the railroad track passing through the building and the elevation of the new building compared to the remaining untouched ruins. Here you can see how our building is completely modern and the way this new building interacts with the ruins. This is a sort of a photo insertion of the building in the view of the book, the new Museum of Duality. Another view of our building. You can see the bricks that somehow dialogue with the former ruins. And those are some of the view of the museum in itself. You can see here the main plan of the museum and the section and the way this building interacts. And you can also see that the museum is divided into two main blocks where there's this hinge in the middle, this pivotal element that connects both of them, letting the people keep walking on the railroad tracks without necessarily enter the museum paths. This is the view from inside the pivotal element, the one with a big dome on the top. This is the one view of the reconstruction of the area of the former railroad, other view of the surrounding. And again, this is a big section of the perspective section of the museum on the lower part. This is the dome that insists on the pivotal part. You can probably recognize the way the vaults are created, reminding the church of Sergius and Bacchus, the little Hagia Sophia church, here again. And this pathway on the top lets the people keep on walking through the museum, letting the people that are not visiting the museum going underneath. This is a description of the collection, so Byzantine and Roman period, an exhibition of photography. Then there's a part of Ottoman period and after. And this is some of the views of the interior part with the volumetric and also atmospheric idea we wanted to give to the project. So again, a new contemporary project, keeping in itself the atmosphere of the ancient ruins. Here you can see other elements, but I'm going fast. This is the main view of the canopy over the railroad tracks. And this is the visiting area of the old ruins. If I have the time to go briefly through this last project, I will explain you this project. I mean, sorry, the project before was from Serai Tulai. It's okay, I'm not going there. Serai Tulai, that is a student from Turkey, while this second project is from Maria Ekina from Russia and Hirem Karabulut from Turkey, that designed this new museum in a Lycian city. This project is ambitious as well as the one before. I also want to thank Manuel Frediani and Leonardo Ricobello that helps me in the production of this project. And the project has to do with the reconstructing the idea, so the third limera. And now I'm going to tell you what it's all about. Designing a phenomenal space by typological and morphological reconstruction. Maybe you know where Limera is. This is the area of Limera, the Lycian area of Turkey. And Limera basically is insisting in this part of the Lycian area. Here you can see how Limera, that is an archaeological site, very complex and very stratified, is a strange place divided into two cities. That's why the title of the building, of the project, the third Limera, because the actual archaeological site shows with a very strong definition how the city of Limera was divided into one city and the second one, and even with elements outside both of the city walls, so the theater and even the burial part and the part dedicated to the dedication and death. Here you can see a brief the definition of the Lycian Greco-Persian period, Hellenistic period, Roman period, and Ottoman and contemporary period. Here you can see how the empires developed through the centuries in the area. So from 14th century before Christ till the 2nd century Anno Domini. And here you can see briefly the timeline of what's happened all over. I'm not going to spend much time on that, not to make you lose time. Again, the timeline continuing until the actual Turkey map with some of the findings on the area. This is, again, a deeper analysis of the site through the period from the Roman till the beginning of the last century. And this is the situation of the area nowadays, where showing even where the actual museum is at the moment, that is in Antalya. So is a museum keeping the elements of the excavation in Limera afar from the archaeological site. Here you can see how other university had already worked on the area. Austrian Academy, Ostrich Archaeologist Institute, E2 from Istanbul, and other institutions that used to work on there. And this is the situation nowadays of the place. So the archaeological area is free, completely free, and somehow left in its very brutal and original situation. The archaeologists are still working in there with a situation pretty complex and not defined. The people can go there, and even the archaeologists can have bath in the river flowing inside the city in itself, and you can find some of the findings straight into the water. We don't have a proper museum. We don't have a city center museum, a tourist center museum. We just have those two buildings built just on the ruins, hosting some of the findings to keep them well conserved. So here you can see the site, and here you can even see some settlements, mainly close to Bodrum. That was the starting point of our idea for the building. So we decided, we were asked to design a new museum and a tourist information point and all the services needed. And so the first idea was, how are we going to interact in this place? Are we going straight on the ruins, or are we going outside the ruins? And secondly, are we going to produce a building, a museum, a classical museum as we always had, or we can have inputs from outside? Those settlements in close to Bodrum gave us a strong suggestion. We decided, why can't we try to redesign a new neighborhood instead of one big building? But let me go with the time. Here you can see a couple of inspiration of our project. One project from Franco Minissi, that is a pretty famous museographer from Italy, that designed some covering from an archaeological site there in Turkey, and also the work of Turgut Kansever, that definitely, I guess, you know better than I do, that was a very important architect from the last century there in Turkey, that produced some project over there, even continued by her daughter and his daughter and her husband. Here you can see some of the analysis, geological analysis of the site, because you can see how the area was flooded 7,000 or 6,000 years ago, and the situation now that is not flooded any longer. This is the geological situation, but now I'm not entering that because probably it's not that important at the moment to show you that, but just to make you understood that the area was a kind of a swamp that now is not a swamp any longer, despite there's a strong presence of water with river and so on. This is the analysis of the site, a brief analysis of what you can find in there, and even the landscape section of the settlements in the archaeological site. And this is the aspect of Limyra nowadays. You can clearly understand and see the first city, the second city, and even the rivers and the channels that surround and enter the city in itself. That makes even this very peculiar and very amazing site. Then we started in analyzing all the axes and all the designing main goal that define the area. You can see here some of the axes that I'm not going to explain you because of the time, obviously, then maybe you're tired and even bored of what I'm saying. Some other analysis. And also we started in analyzing the typology of the buildings from the different periods. So you can see here the Greco-Persian period and their typologies, the Hellenistic typologies, the Roman typologies, the Ottoman typology, and even the contemporary typologies you could find in there, because we were very interested into the typologies you could have found there that could have been the starting point for our new design intervention. Then we started in checking better the different structure you could have found all over. Those are the Lycian structure that you can find over there, because again, they should have become a reference for our project. Here you can see some more Lycian images of the building. Here you can see even other Hellenistic elements that define the space and other structure that affect. Then we have the Roman structure. We analyze all of them. Some of them are still flooded by the water of the river. So we have Lycian, we have the Hellenistic, we have the Roman structure all over. Lots of Roman structure, actually. You can see here how many Roman ruins are still over there. And then the Ottoman and contemporary structure still is standing over there. So we have lots of typologies existing in the place from lots of periods. Here is a synthetic view of the surrounding, even from the landscape point of view. So the vegetation and even the old quarry abandoned pretty close to the place. So how those elements could have inspired us. Look at these Roman elements flooded by the water. A very amazing place. I strongly suggest you to visit it. And with this amazing view, this amazing render designed by the two students, you can see the actual state of the city of Limyra. Limyra 1, Limyra 2, the rivers, and now all those cultivation of oranges that is all over the place with lots of glass houses all over. Using all the alignment of the previous axes that we analyzed again, we decided not to design a building inside one of the two cities, but to design a new city insisting on this area, using all the alignments we could have found inside the former two cities. That's why the title, the third Limira, because we are going to design a new settlement that would have hosted all those services we were asked for. Here you can see the axis and the founding elements of the project. Okay, I'm not entering. So the idea was to recreate a new morphology with a new city, so a morphological project composed by using the former typological suggestion. So it's a project of typology reproposed and the morphology of the city reproposed, as well. And at the end of the day, this is the project. You can see the new settlements, like a new boroughs, made of lots of pavilion diffused, like the old city is, and like those settlements I showed you in Bodrum, beside the other city, the Limira 1 and the Limira 2, occupying this amazing place that is the confluence of the two channels of the river. Then we divided into different functions, but now it's just about designing architecture. I don't want to make it simple, but it's probably something that comes from outside. And so in designing the different pavilions, as you can easily guess, this is the final project. You can see from the new view, I still believe that this is one of the most amazing renders I haven't seen. We decided that the new buildings should have remains the original one, both in typology and both in style. For example, this is the Lycian Museum, and the Lycian Museum, this is the new project, recover some of the elements from the Lycian structure you can find all over. This is even the interior of the Lycian Museum. You can still see all the elements reminding the decoration of the Lycian buildings, obviously using and designing contemporary architecture. So this is the project. This is the reference. Pretty clear, I guess. The Hellenistic project recovers some of the elements from the Hellenistic period. So the triglyphs, the basement, the attachment to the sky, the way the light is controlled, and the Roman elements instead refer themselves to the Roman period, to some of the elements from the Roman period that can be found all over. The same can be said for the Ottoman area. And the main building of the entire city is a resemble of everything, keeping together some of the main important typology from the exterior point of view that changes into the inside, creating the suggestion you could find in elements all over the city. So basement and upper space, a tower element that can be a landscape sign of everything, and also the connection with the landscape and the vegetation. This is still the bath that we decided to create, reusing the water that obviously evokes a Roman bath. Here you can see some views. This is a view from outside, from the other bond of the river. And this is some overall images of what the area could have looked like in case they decide to design it. Okay, as I told you in the beginning, we do all those kind of research and all those kind of projects because we study these topics since a long time, and that's the reason why I met and I got close with your professors Alessandro Kamitz and Luca Orlandi, that gave us the chance of study some situation and some sites thanks to some workshop. I actually am strongly convinced that the academic offer is not enough in the in a market that at the moment is very spread and wide, and it's a worldwide market. So to make difference, I strongly invite you to take part to all those chances that your professor, mainly I can talk about Professor Kamitz and Professor Orlandi because I know them and I know that they are very open and they are very connected with the rest of the world, to make new experience, to make new chances of deal with different words and different countries. As I showed you, my students were from Turkey and Russia because they tried to open up their horizons. So I really suggest you to keep in consideration the chance of making experience outside. And obviously I can talk of what we do, and the reason why I know Professor Kamitz and Professor Orlandi, that is the fact that we met during one workshop 2 weeks long in Rome, mainly in Tivoli, that is that this year will get to his 21st edition. Is a workshop with students from all over the world, with usually a kind of 150 students every year that are grouped into small groups, designing architecture, designing contemporary architecture, as I showed you, in an archaeological area. This area is Villa Adriana. That is the place where we got friends. And this is worldwide known and worldwide recognized. Obviously, I can speak about what I know, that is this workshop. Obviously, you can have a lot of offers, but since Professor Kamitz and Professor Orlandi are part of our organization, if you are interested to make such an experience, if you are interested to join us in this amazing experience that lasts since more than 2 decades, get information from them, and we can organize some tutoring or some idea to make you understand better what we do during those 15 days in Rome, to get to know this kind of work. Obviously, this is not the time. We don't have the time to make the presentation of the workshop, and this is not what I was asked for. But I cannot stop by inviting you to take part in our events, because I know that Professor Kamitz and Professor Orlandi strongly believe in that one. They have a big experience and they can guide you in the best ways possible. But obviously, if you want more information, you just have to ask them, and then we can be taken in contact to help you to try to connect everything. Saying that, I want to thank you for the attention. Sorry if I exceed the time I was given. I have this tendency of speaking too much, and I am here disposable to listen to any kind of question you possibly have to ask me. Thank you again.
Thank you very much for your presentation and for all the projects that show different approaches in the design of exhibition spaces, museums within archaeological context. Let's see if we have any comments from the audience. By the way, I have posted in the chat the link to the Premio Piranesi if anyone is interested.
Yeah, I can see that Professor Orlandi will give a seminar about Piranesi
in a couple of weeks. In a couple of weeks, I mean, the last week of our courses, I will lecture about Piranesi, as I'm doing every semester.
Do we have any comments?